All right, hello everyone, and welcome to our reflection cast from the second day of the Better Together Summit. We're very glad to have all of you joining us today, and hope that you will, as you're joining the session from wherever you're joining the session, whether it's from inside of the Better Together conference account, from Facebook, from YouTube, from Twitter, if you'll just sort of find the chat in whatever it is that you're using and greet us and let us know that you're here and that you can hear us and where you're coming from and all of that sort of stuff. We're very excited today to be joined by Anne McMullan, who's going to sort of wrap up with me today the thoughts of the 2 days of this conference, talking specifically about leading these changes and trying to adapt going through this challenging time that we're going through. So I'm going to briefly introduce Anne, tell you a little bit about her, and then hand it off to her as I'm seeing people joining us. Tom, great to see you. We were just talking about you moments before we began the session. And Kathy, good to see you, and Laura. So as you're joining, please tell us where you're coming from and that sort of stuff. You'll also use this chat periodically throughout the reflection cast. We're going to ask for you to sort of tie concepts in what Anne is talking about to learning that you've had from different sessions. I know I've got some ideas. I got to peek behind the curtain, so I know what we're going to talk about, but I'm hoping to hear mostly from you as we talk about leadership at the classroom level, at the campus level, at the district level, at the university level, at every level of leadership, and how we lead these changes. So without further ado, let me just briefly introduce Anne McMullan. She is the founder and lead consultant of Anne McMullan Education Consultant based out of Los Angeles, and is a very active presenter on leadership and technology and lots of other concepts. She is a moderator for COSIN, as you see here. She also hosts the monthly webinar series, the Empower Ed Superintendent or Empowered Superintendent, and is also an active collaborator for educational collaborators. Anne is a 34-year-old veteran. She is a 34-year-old veteran. She started teaching when she was 1, and spent 18 years as a middle school social studies teacher, and was also the executive director for educational technology in Klein ISD here in the Houston area before she abandoned us in our hot sweat heat here in the Houston area and moved to beautiful sunny California, where she lives now, and also is the author of Life Lessons in Leadership, a book she's going to talk a little bit about during our session today, and also a book that you will be eligible to win free copies of. We will do a drawing of all the people who are attending this reflection cast and give away some copies of that book to those of you who are joining us live. That book is also available at lifelessonsinleadership.com, as well as all the places you go to buy books, Amazon, barnesandnoble.com, etc. So without further ado, Anne, I am excited to hear from you and learn with you today.
Well, TJ, thank you so much. It is such a pleasure to be joining you today, and congratulations on 2 really impactful, powerful days. And you know, as I'm looking at the screen here, this notion of better together, there's never been a time when that was more true than it is now. And as we look at leading change in challenging times, we're going to look at it through that lens of how we can do this all better together. So with that, TJ, we'll go ahead and move on. I'm going to take a look at this with our group, and I see so many of you coming on. And yes, as TJ mentioned, I was actually born and raised in Texas and worked in the Houston area for 34 years, since I was 1 year old, right, at 34 years. But so I'm happy to see so many of my Texas friends back on, but nice to connect with you again. We're going to look at this through 3 different lenses. We're going to look at some challenges around leading change. We're going to look at change itself, and then finally at the leadership capacity. And what TJ mentioned about leadership is just so true. When I wrote the book, Life Lessons in Leadership, I really had in mind that we all have different phases of leadership in our life. Quite honestly, as a child, being the oldest sibling can sometimes be a leadership position. And as you go through school, there are different times when you might have an opportunity to be a class president or lead or head of the football team or something. And as adults, quite honestly, I cannot think of two other leadership positions that are more impactful than that of being a parent and being a teacher. As a parent, you impact generations to come. And as a teacher, over a career, you'll impact thousands of people. So it's not always people who have a title that we think of as leader. So let's look at it through those three lenses. I want to start with challenges. And that's a word I think we're all beginning to understand more and more lately. And let's go ahead, TJ, we can move on to the next one as we begin to look at challenges. What you see on the screen certainly are some of the challenges that we have been facing ever since Friday, March the 13th. And how ironic that this gift to us came on a Friday the 13th. I'm not sure what all was lined up to make that happen, but it did. But as you look at the challenges that we are currently going through, led by the coronavirus pandemic, certainly the issue of remote learning. Oh, did we lose it there? There we go. Thank you.
We're back.
The issue of remote learning is one that from a Friday to a Monday, we had to jump into that. And some of us were ready for that, and some of us were not ready for that. But it is one that we have been dealing with now for almost 4 months, struggling with trying to make that all work. Two aspects of education that really came to light in the process of coronavirus and remote learning are the issues, first of all, of equality and equity. And for those of you who had an opportunity to hear Doug Fisher's presentation earlier today, he really did a great job explaining why we need to really look at equity maybe in a different lens than we have traditionally in education. So that's one area, and whether it's digital equity, access to devices and internet for remote learning, or equity for learning strategies that really work for different learners, those are things we are challenged with in education and really have to begin to address quite seriously. And the other that really came to light, and something I've been doing a lot of work with different groups on lately, is the role of parents. Because when we moved from a Friday to a Monday to remote learning, also the role of parents, who have always been partners in our education process, but it changed dramatically for them. And we have to think about that as we go forward with this. If we're going to use hybrid models or remote learning continues, we need to always engage our parents as co-teachers in this process. And finally, I have the graphic of what's next up there. We don't know. And I know that all of your districts are working very hard to figure out what's next. And I'm hearing from several districts that they've set a date. August 13th is one that told me yesterday they're opening. Others are still trying to figure out, is it a hybrid? Do we get to all go back to school together? How does that all work? We don't know what's next. And that's probably one of the biggest challenges we're facing now. So I'd like to kind of keep that context in mind as we look ahead. And I'd like to kind of hear from you at this point. So TJ, let's move on to our next slide, please, and begin to think about change. And so we've looked at the challenge, particularly the current challenges. Let's take a look at change and change process, and then we'll talk about that just a bit. So where I'd like to hear from you at this point is, what are some of the changes that you're going to face in your school or your school district as you get ready to start the 2021 school year, whenever that start might be for you? So let's take a look, and TJ, I'll let you kind of lead that conversation as we're looking in the chat, but share with us some of the changes that you know you're going to be facing.
Yeah, so if people will talk about add those changes to the chat. I know from the conversations we've had over the course of the last 2 days, we've talked a lot about changes in student engagement. We've talked a lot about changes in equitable access, and how for some students, Steve Barkley talked about this afternoon, for some students, there's an acceleration in what this change is bringing out in their level of access to learning. And then for other students, there's this block, and that it's going to create maybe some additional gaps. I see Helen has talked a little bit about, how to deal with building relationships with students if you're not physically in the same space with them as many times. Doug talked about building relationships with new teachers and people fresh to your campus or fresh to your profession as people are joining. And just all of that, that ability to find balance, as Laura is saying, to pivot, as Tom is saying, and that sort of stuff. We see some specific examples. Kathy's talking about sort of the logistics of how people are going to be on campuses and that sort of stuff. And yeah, Tom, online. That's going to certainly be an interesting reality for us. So lots of big changes coming in the future. Not all of them terrible, but definitely all of them maybe a little frightening.
Right. Yeah, I love Tom's comment about welcome to kindergarten online. I think the thing I would add to that is welcome to kindergarten safe distancing, 6 feet apart. Really, that's going to happen with kindergarten as well. So I love that. And I love that the point that Doug brought up earlier about how do you make those connections? His point was that when we moved quickly from Friday to Monday in March to face-to-face to online learning, we had already made our connections with the students. We had been together with them for months. And so that was there. And that's not what we're going to have when we open school again, depending on the framework and how it looks. So yeah, there's some real changes and challenges that we're going to be facing there. And so let's go ahead.
We were just talking about some of the things that people can do to adapt to that in some sessions. I know I've referenced this a couple of times just because I really enjoyed the session. The Ames Center had some talking about how to do professional development around STEM and that sort of stuff. How do you deal with people not having access to the manipulatives and materials? And they've had some great ideas in that session on how to use things like cereal boxes to create those materials, things that everybody's got lying around so that you're not relying on those common materials that we know we're going to have in the classroom. So that's just an example of someone's session that sort of proposed some solutions to this change.
No, TJ, I love that. It really does kind of force us to just think differently, doesn't it? The way we've always done it maybe really didn't work for everybody before, but we know it's not going to work for us now. So we really do need to. So thank you all for your comments in the chat. It's really good. I'd like to propose to you that perhaps it is this notion of change itself that is one of our biggest challenges. And I think, we're in an education system that was created over 100 years ago, when we moved to the first industrial revolution and we automated production and we automated school and we put kids in a box at 1 year and moved them through the system in that same box throughout. So we've known that we needed to make some changes, and many school districts have been making marvelous changes for the past several years. But some are still kind of in that mode, and it's this notion of change itself that becomes a challenge. And I want to share some thinking with you from a book that I had been using lately. You may be familiar with Thomas Friedman's book, Thank You for Being Late. What I love about the book itself is the subtitle, which is An Optimist's Guide to Thriving in the Age of Acceleration. And I would share with you that Friedman wrote this book in 2016, not last week, but oh my goodness, some of the content in that book really resonates now. Let's take a look at one quote from the book. What you see here, one of the people that Friedman quotes in his book is Dov Seidman, who, as you see, is the CEO of Learn. And I actually had the opportunity a couple years ago to hear Friedman and Seidman present together on this book. And this quote really stuck with me. And I think we see this now more in the last 4 months than maybe in the last 4 years. But that the world is not just rapidly changing, it is being dramatically reshaped. It is starting to operate differently in many realms all at once. And oh my goodness, have we ever seen that lately? Let me go on with one further quote from the book, and let's take a look and think about this together. Indeed, there is a mismatch between the change in the pace of change and our ability to develop the learning systems, the training systems, management systems, and I love this piece, social safety nets and government regulations that would enable citizens to get the most out of these accelerations and cushion their worst impacts. And could we not all use a little cushioning right now? But we didn't have the opportunity to put that together when we had to shift from a Friday to a Monday, when the pandemic took over this country in a way quickly that we had never anticipated before. So I'd like you to keep those thoughts in mind as we move on ahead and think about that and the pace of change. And I'm going to share a little video with you now. I love this concept. You know, if leading change is so good, well, you do it. You go first and tell me how it works for you. So TJ, let's take a look at the video on leading change. If change is good, you go first. And you will see some ways to inspire change that you might then take back and use with your own groups that you're working with.
Perfect. Give me just a second to make this transition and go back to the beginning of the video. And here we go.
Thank you, TJ. Little louder.
If you're serious.
All right.
Thank you. While you're bringing the slide deck up, I want to respond to a couple of comments in the chat. You know, Tom asked, could we pause school without providing busy work while educators take a semester to really plan a change? That would be the ideal. But I see the following comment from Anthony in the chat. Some parents are saying if we can't get, quote, back to normal, they will opt out to do homeschool or online school. So we are in a position where we've got to rethink school in the context of COVID-19, because I don't think it's going away by August or September. So we've got to rethink that, and that is the big challenge. So what I'd like you to do now in the chat, if you looked at some of those suggestions for leading change, and you can see some of them here, focus on strengths and lead with actions. I think particularly with school leadership, we have to be sure that if we're asking others to do something, we need to be doing it ourselves as well, that our actions will speak much louder than our words. And to set the stage for innovation, which means that taking a risk is okay, and that if it doesn't work, we learn from that and we move forward. But I'd like for you all to look at some, I've pulled 8 from the film, and let's look at that on the next slide, TJ. And I'd like for you in the chat to kind of look at these 8, change what needs changing, not what's easy, to focus on strengths, to start with your beliefs and let your actions speak, as I just spoke to that, celebrating success, measure results, set the stage for innovation, and stand with them. So I'd like you to think about those 8 and consider how you or your school colleagues are going to be able to implement any or all of the strategies, these 8, or it might be some of the others that you saw in the clip. And let's just take a minute, TJ, and kind of look where our comments are going there in the chat. And if you've got something that you saw from one of the earlier sessions today or yesterday, that'd be great as well, TJ.
Yeah, and I think that there's a quote from the video that I thought was really funny, and I didn't catch the entire quote, but it was about, you know, the alligators in the swamp. You know, when you've got alligators coming after you, you start what a former boss of mine used to say, running from the brainstem, right? You go into that fight or flight, and we have been collectively in this position of fear, and Anthony and Natalie both talked about sort of opposing views, where we have some parents saying, well, if you don't go back to normal, then I'm going to keep my kids at home. And then we have other parents saying, if you go back to normal, I'm going to keep my kids at home. And so there's just this tremendous amount of fear driving so much of what we're doing. And I think that there's an opportunity as leaders for all of us to embrace these ideas and lead this change, rather than just sort of chase the change like you would with an alligator in the swamp, but rather leading it and taking the bull by the horns. And we've seen so many sessions over the past couple of days. I'm thinking of John Willis's session earlier today about collective efficacy, and I'm thinking about Dion Rivera's session about parent engagement, and these ideas that we can really find ways to look at this as an opportunity to let go of some of those things that needed changing, to get to your point, and move them in the right direction. But Zulma is saying, you know, it all starts with belief. You need to all be on the same page in what you're really thinking about. And Melissa's talking about innovation, and this is talking about celebrating success. I think celebrating is very important right now, right? That's a very important thing. Can sometimes feel like there's not a lot of success to celebrate, but I remember from my new teacher mentoring days, sometimes what we would celebrate was that the new teacher got in her car and drove to school that day. And so to celebrate, good job.
Yeah. Day one, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, no, thank you all for your great thoughts. And there was a question about the link to the video, and that will be in the huddle. So it is on the deck, and you'll be able to link to it. It is on YouTube, and you're certainly welcome to use that. So I really appreciate your thinking. Kathy, I love the quote you just shared from a mentor. Are you going to do the easy thing or the right thing? Because the right thing in anything is anything but easy, right? Oftentimes, that is the truth. That is really true. Thank you for that leadership. So let's transition on to leadership then, and let's look at leadership in the context of leading this change in challenging times. So I mentioned earlier, leaders come in a variety of roles, you know, whether that's a parent, a teacher, a sibling, or a principal, or a superintendent, or the head of the Department of Education. I mean, you know, it's just all different forms of leadership. So let's move ahead, TJ, onto the slide as we get into that. And again, looking at this leadership, you can see there from the quote, the ability to motivate a group or organize a group. And I want to take a look at some of the various facets of that. So as we move on, when we look at school leadership, one of the things that is most critical for school leaders to pull together when they're leading change is this concept of visionary leadership. It's very easy to stay where we are. You really don't need a leader to do that. But to move to vision, to look at what will be relevant for our students, because we're here for them, what will be relevant for their lives, that takes a vision. And so, TJ, let's move on. So as we try to do that, one of the points that I make frequently, and unfortunately this has been true for a lot of us for many years in K-12 education, is that we work in silos. I might be the IT department, the curriculum department, I'm the HR department, and we're all doing our own thing in silos. But if you'll click, TJ, you'll see the point there is that when we have points in all directions, it's really like having no point at all. We need to get out of these silos. We need to come together. So on the next slide, when you can finally bring everybody pointing together, and that's really what visionary leadership is all about, you've got to get to that common vision. So let's talk about how that happens. When we look at that, first of all, it takes a certain skill set. No, you can go on to that next one, TJ, to the manager versus leader.
I just said, you know, this is my favorite slide.
I know, this is your favorite. So I'm actually going to let you talk about this one in just a second. But as we look at this, I think one of the reasons that we may face some of this silo business in education is that we have people who are charged with leading, but they are actually outstanding managers, but not so much when it comes to leading. And you can see the difference there. I often say to people, you know, if you have processes and programs in place that are working exceptionally well for you, then you need a manager to assure that those procedures stay in place and that they continue to work for you. But if you've got to pivot, if you've got to move in a different direction, that takes a different set of skills, and that takes leadership. And TJ, I know we're coming up on time as well, but take this slide because I know you love it. Go for it.
But we've seen so much of this over the course of the past 2 days with every session, thinking about, okay, if we're going to really seize this as an opportunity, we can't immediately put on our manager hats, which I think is often as a classroom leader, as a district leader, as a campus leader, it's often that inclination. We're, as educators, we're problem solvers. We want to look at the challenges before us and find ways to manage our way around them. You know, one of the things we spend a lot of time training teachers on is classroom management.
Exactly.
and you know, we've seen so many sessions today. Thinking of Letty's session this morning and so many other, or yesterday morning, days, I don't even know what day it is, but so many sessions about the fact that as leaders, we have to do this right column of things. We have to create the future. We can't manage the present. We have to think about ideas and possibilities and all of the things that we could do differently rather than just looking at the challenges and trying to fix them. It's not that we can't ignore the challenges, but great leaders can sort of, like those circus acts, spin two plates at once and figure out how to do both.
Well, you're absolutely right. I hone in particularly on the one under the leader column where it says to use problems as opportunities. And if we don't do that now, to use the problems we have as opportunities to fix things that are problems now, but maybe that have been problems all along, then we're really missing the opportunity to do that. So let's move on, TJ. Thank you. You mentioned, and I'll just highlight briefly, that sometimes you do need both. Sometimes you need to be able to manage, but you also need to be able to lead. But I think we need to be cognizant of what those different skill sets are and when we use our management strategies and when we use our leadership strategies. So as we begin to wrap up, I want to just, and TJ, this clicks through. If you want to put all or one at a time on, that's fine. We need to, as you look at leading change, you want to define your goals and you want to engage your stakeholders as you go through that process of defining your goals so that you can develop a shared vision and mission. and then empower and support other leaders. You can't do this alone. You've got to move ahead and do that on your own. And I love number 5, build collective capacity. And Sibme is a great way to do that, a wonderful platform to build the capacity of all your teachers, of your staff. So leverage that, whether it's Sibme or another one that you're doing. But if people don't have the skill set, you need to help them get the skill set that they're going to need. And then there's a number 6, I believe, there also. Assess your readiness. And we almost could have skipped this time. Yeah, because we didn't have a lot of time to assess readiness for this change that we're all going through right now. But in more normal times, you would want to assess if it's the right time to make the change. But my friends, I would say to you, we are in a situation now where we better be ready, because it is the time and we're going to have to make that change. So let's begin. Go ahead.
One of my favorite expressions, if you stay ready, you don't ever have to get ready.
There you go. There you go. I like that. That's great. Very smart. Very smart. I want to wrap up by sharing with you just some highlights around leadership that I actually, in the book that TJ mentioned earlier, Life Lessons in Leadership, as I was transitioning from being an ed tech director to being a speaker around leadership, I thought about 5 different elements of leadership that are critically important. And the first one is the one you see at the top of the circle: listen. You cannot be a leader if you don't listen to those around you, if you don't really process what is happening. And I don't just mean hear, I mean truly listen. And don't be just listening to give your next answer, but to really process. So with that, then that leads to the next one, which is to learn. And to learn, and that's okay, we can do this on the side. No,
Yeah.
that's fine. So from listen, we go to learn. And because we're in the learning business, for goodness sakes, we've got to keep learning all the time. And to learn, then we begin to, let's go back one. Let's do that one more. Let's go back. From learn, we then go to love. And when I talk about love, I mean love your people. You don't have to like everybody that you're leading, just like you didn't have to like all your students, but you sure needed to love them to be able to see that they were moving forward in the best way and accomplishing all that they could. And then leverage, you cannot do this alone. You need to leverage the talents and the skill sets of others. And again, I love Sibme for how it allows us to do that and really learn from each other and leverage each other's talents. And finally, luck. And my thought on luck is that you either need to create your own, or be sure that you are ready for it when it comes knocking at your doorstep. So with that, TJ, we can move on to the next slide. In creating that, I did this with the notion that if you are in some kind of leadership role and things aren't going the way you had envisioned, check and see if any one of these 5 things is missing. And on the next slide, I have created a mnemonic device to help you do that. So as we wrap up today, I want you to join in with me. And you'll see TJ doing this as well. If you're right-handed, raise your right hand. And if you're left-handed, raise your left hand and make a fist. This is not a mean fist. This is just a fist, okay? And we can go to the next one. So let's go through this quickly. Make a fist. And then next one, TJ. When told to do so, I'm going to ask you to open one finger at a time, starting with your thumb. And I'm going to ask you, next one, TJ, to repeat the words that I say. So let's do this on the next slide together. So you've got your fist, open your thumb and say, listen.
Listen.
Listen. Index finger, learn.
Learn.
Middle finger, love.
Love.
Ring finger, leverage.
Leverage.
And pinky finger, luck.
Luck.
Now keep that hand open. TJ, let's go to the next slide if you can navigate and keep it open. If you are in a room with somebody else, lean over and pat them on the back and say, thank you for your leadership. Or if you can do it by thanking the person in your gallery view in the window next to you, pat them on the back and say, thank you for your leadership. Or pat yourself on the back and say, thank you for your leadership. Because leadership is tough. It's ever changing, lots of challenges. When you see it done right, you need to thank that person and thank them profusely. And with that, I'm going to thank all of you for spending this time with us this afternoon. And TJ, we can go to the last slide and wrap it up. I wish you all the very best as you move forward. You have my contact information there. You can find me on my webpage. Email me if I can be of help to you in any way as you are leading learning. Happy to do that and continue this conversation. And because we are all better together, we can't get it done without each other. TJ, thank you so much.
Well, Anne, thank you so much. And I really appreciate the opportunity to collaborate on this with you and to learn with you. It really is, I think, the central theme of this conference was, if you see in the logo, the little tower of Jenga blocks, which was one of our team members' brilliant ideas about how to use an analogy to describe the situation that we're all in right now. And sometimes when you start to take those Jenga blocks out, it can feel a little shaky and feel overwhelming. But knowing where to reinforce and knowing where to allow for some flexibility is how those structures remain standing. And I think we've really seen proven with all of the learning that we've had over the last couple of days, and with all of the learning that we'll be able to continue to have. I hope everyone will continue to log back into the conference, continue to engage with the conference materials, use the discussions to talk to one another over the next year. I think that's a great place. We've built an amazing community of over 3,000 people.
Wow.
Who continue. And I got to tell you, the map is unbelievable. We have people literally on every continent except for Antarctica. Apparently, nobody cares about special development in Antarctica. But just unbelievable to see the level of engagement, the level of conversation with not just our formal sessions, but these informal sessions as well. It's really inspiring to see. Sibme is built around the idea that educators learn best when they learn from one another.
Yes.
And I think that is something that's been proven out over the last couple of days. And I'm so grateful to you. I'm so grateful to everyone who joined us and stayed with us all the way through 12 hours of learning over the course of 2 days, and stuck it out with us the whole time. And some prizes for you who did. That's going to be some extra winning for you guys. But for me, just this session is winning in and of itself. So, Anne, thank you so much.
Thank you, TJ. And thanks to all our friends. The chat has been phenomenal. Thank you so much.
And have a wonderful day, everyone. Thank you.
Good luck.